Farms are obviously fundamental to the entire coffee supply chain. And there's some really interesting things that I got a different perspective on from being a director of a coffee farm called Goodland Organics in Goleta, California. Back then, I would tell people I'd see around Santa Barbara, oh yeah, I worked on a coffee farm, and sometimes they would actually get to come visit. I remember quite a few instances where people would tell me after I gave them a little tour, wow, when you told me you worked on a farm, I just didn't expect it to look like that. And I always thought that was interesting. And I would ask why, of course. And they would say, well, when you said farm, I thought it would be flat. And I've been thinking about this today, just how to tell people as part of a bigger picture of coffee education, like how do you get people to understand nuances of coffee production when they have never been to a coffee farm and it's just completely, basically a different world. And so I want to start with this theme of flat as a starting point, right? And so I think growing up in coastal California, there's a lot of farms around here, but they're flat. They are usually monoculture, so just one plant species being grown. And oftentimes they're very efficient through the use of heavy machinery. And there's sometimes very few humans actually working on the farm. And coffee farms, for the most part, with the exception of Brazil and Australia, are very different. And one thing is that they being extremely high elevation, they're not flat at all. Very steep inclinations. And this has so many consequences because, first off, it's really hard to walk as a human up and down these steep hills all day, whether you're harvesting, pruning, fertilizing, pest control, you name it. Basically, any farm activity is strenuous, and it's really impossible to get machinery if the technology even existed to it up in these farms. I mean, it has to be hand done at this point until we create sophisticated machines that can handle instability in terrain and all these other things. Like, it's really important. So other than, okay, yeah, it's tough to walk in the mountains, why does it matter that coffee farms aren't flat? Well, they it matters because of access. And that's one thing that if you've studied any sort of sustainable agriculture or permaculture, they talk a lot about access. And it's so interesting because a lot of times we're so focused on the focal point, the farm, where is the production happening? Where's the money being made? All that stuff. But it's so important to consider the context or the periphery being a road. And up in the tropics, where the coffee farms aren't flat, the roads are usually dirt. And it rains, of course, high up in the tropics, and these can wash out pretty frequently. My understanding is that back in the day, before climate change was really leaving its mark on the world, the wet and the dry season was a bit more predictable. And so these roads, they would of course wash out and become impassable, but it was a bit more predictable. Now, with the increasing frequency of catastrophic and erratic rainfall, it's becoming more difficult to plan when the road is going to be passable or not. And so, if you think about it from a labor perspective, as a worker, I'm not necessarily going to want to go work on a coffee farm where maybe it's raining and maybe I have doubts whether I'll even arrive. And if I don't arrive, I'm not going to work and I'm not going to get paid. And it's such a different situation from me. I wake up in Santa Cruz and I never worry if I'm going to be able to make it to Verve or not. And it's so interesting. Also, just the delays and the maintenance required on these dirt roads when they need repair or they're closed is significant. And these aren't places that are maintained by a county. A lot of times it's just people who live up in those areas that maintain them themselves. And it's super hard. I mean, you just have shovels, again, no heavy machinery, and you could spend days making the road better so that people can go to work, you can get materials up and down. It's really, really important. Um, Also, one thing that's different about a coffee farm versus, I'm just comparing it to conventional farms like soy or wheat or things like that, is that up in these high mountains, uh, there's a lot of shade and there's very old trees sometimes if it's not been totally deforested. And these trees are they're very important for, we all know about shade grown coffee and the biodiversity that they provide habitat to migratory birds and so on. But it's challenging because you can't navigate the farm, again, it not being a monoculture necessarily. uh, it's just not as easy to navigate. And so I have created a little table for reference, but it's really interesting. I think about, what does it mean, all these things on a coffee bag? How can somebody look at a coffee bag and read the information on it and have some understanding of what that means on the farm level? And so me, having traveled to coffee farms and having worked on coffee farms in California and Guatemala, I see 1,800 meters, I see 2,000 meters above sea level, and I'm just thinking, wow, that is so far out there. I'm, I mean, just all the challenges, and it's so easy to look at a bag of coffee and say, oh, it's only 1,100 meters above sea level. That's not very high, and kind of like, scoff at it. But there's real challenges with growing that high up, and from so many different angles. And so hopefully that provides a little bit of context. I'm going to keep making these sort of videos with very particular themes. So follow along if you want to learn more. Talk to you soon.